welcome to the ordinary meeting of Council this morning. I don't believe we have any apologies this morning. Are there any declarations of interest? I haven't been made aware of any. Item 4 is public forums, petitions, deputations. I'm not aware of any this morning. So we'll move to item 5, which is the confirmation of minutes for the ordinary meeting of the 30th of September. Does somebody want to move and second? Then we'll see how we go. Moved by Eric, seconded by Jeremy. Well, actually, they're now open for discussion. Are there any alterations or changes? I'm not hearing any, so on that note, I will put the motion. All in favour will say aye. Aye. Against, no, carried. Right, we'll move to item 6, which is the adoption of committee resolutions. The first one up is the Strategy and Policy Committee meeting of the 22nd of September. Eric, would you like to comment on that?
Well, I moved this taken as read. Basically, we had some fulsome discussions, which members of the committee have expressed some pleasure at actually having a more fulsome meeting. So I think we'll keep that standard going if we can.
Thank you, Eric, and you'll move the resolution?
Yes, move.
Seconded by Lloyd. All in favour say aye.
Aye.
Right, we'll move to the regulatory meeting of the 22nd of September. Neville, would you like to comment on your meeting?
Well, I'll move that Mr. Chairman, and also just take it as read. If anybody has any questions, we're happy to discuss those.
Was it a question or are you seconding?
No, I can't second it because even though it looks like I was there, I wasn't there.
So correct.
My name, I wasn't, apologies for that.
So we can correct those minutes. Jeremy McPhail was an apology. Seconded by David. Any questions or discussion? I'll put the recommendation. All in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Right, we'll move to the Organisational Performance and Audit Committee meeting of the 23rd of September. Lyndall, would you like to comment on the meeting?
I'll take them as read and move that they be adopted. Thanks.
Lyndall, seconded for that motion. Helen? I'll put the recommendation. All in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Right, we'll move to the Regional Services Committee meeting of the 23rd of September. Jeremy, would you like to comment on your meeting?
I'll just take it as read, and just to comment that there were 3 annual reports: the Biosecurity, Biodiversity and Operations Division, the Land and Water Surfaces Division, and Rating District Works Program, which there's obviously a lot going on and a lot more to do. So,
Moved by Jeremy, second for that recommendation. Lloyd?
Mr. Chairman, I'll second it, but I really want to follow on the discussion within the committee, and that is there were 3 annual reports. Now, while we can report to ourselves, I try to make the point that we're actually reporting to the public, and it's such an asset to have those annual reports in a public-facing form, even though we have a slightly different presentation. And thank you to those that did the PowerPoint presentation, but I think we need to use this as an asset, a greater asset than we have. I'll just make that comment because I think we can do better as we interface with the public, and they'd understand more about our business.
Thanks for that. And it was a very fulsome report, I seem to remember, an eye-watering number of pages, a lot of information. And it's a good point. It's how do we disseminate that? Peter.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. I support that too, the advent of live streaming, definitely making it more forward-facing to the public.
Is that any further?
On the Audit River at Wallistown, that's ongoing, and the timeframes for further work or discussion, I don't know, will we need to comment on, what's that, at a later stage, we want to talk more about that Audit River issue. I know it's public.
And I guess the question is it Ariti or is it Makarere or is it both? Paul, would you like to make some comment?
at Wallistown.
Oh, it's on the radar. Yeah, Raymond, from memory, had a few conversations around that. I think there's plans to go out and engage with the community again, but obviously it's dependent on how that's funded in the future. So I think that those conversations are still to be had with the community. What can be done? If that was the question, I was busy talking to all of them at the same time.
And I think there has been some conversations that the logical way forward is for Wallistown to join the appropriate catchment group, which may open the door to have a loan or whatever to go forward. That hasn't happened yet, and there seems to be some confusion as to the right way forward, but I'm sure it is under discussion, and I'm sure that we need to progress that one. It seems to be quite stable, but again, there's certainly a perception there that it is an issue that is quite important.
What I can do is bring back an update as a priority for the next meeting.
Actually, just so I can maybe help a wee bit here too. Sorry, apologies for being out of the room. And so there have been some conversations held with the chairman of the Reedy Liaison Committee around the possibility of being part of that committee. So those conversations are proceeding quite positively, and as Paul said, there's further discussions. We'll come back to you to have a best progress. From the photographs, this is a long-standing issue, and hasn't been a lot of erosion back over the last it's a significant hole. It's not moving very quick, but that doesn't mean we need to get on with it. So it's taken this route.
Lloyd.
Yeah, just for clarification, Mr. Chairman, the issue is it's an unrated section of the Makarewa, and we want to move that into a rated area, working with Southland District, and then put a program in place to stabilise that, because it's what we class as at-risk area. So if we can move that forward, that'd be great.
A very small typo on page 46. I think it's got Councillor Amy Ruddenclaw. I don't think there is a Councillor Amy Ruddenclaw. It's Margaret Ruddenclaw.
Yeah, no, I'll ask Therese to correct that.
Yeah.
In 30 minutes, we'll be talking to you come up for adoption. This is just the adoption of the resolution, so that's fine.
Any further comments on that report? We have Jeremy moved.
I seconded.
Seconded by Lloyd. I'll put the resolution. All in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Right, and the final one on that list was the Chief Executive's Review Subcommittee meeting of the 6th of October.
I can move that, Mr. Chairman.
Moved by Lloyd, seconded by Jeremy. All in favour will say aye.
Aye.
Right, we'll move to item 7, notification of extraordinary of urgent business, supplementary reports or other. I'm not aware of any this morning. So we'll move to item 8, questions. We have Councillor Hudlow and Lloyd. Lyndall, you're up.
All my questions in the paper, so I look forward to.
Okay. Just been informed that because we have a member of the public present, we need to mask up. Now, are you responding to the question, or is one of the staff members, Lyndall's?
So respond to you. Let me just get my so through your chair, our regulatory role as a regulator. It's supposed to be as a regulator as it is now. I guess the question is, can depend which entity, if we move to new entities, or whether it stays with council or some other different entity, but our role remains as a regulator. So that is not opposed to change in these reforms. Just a bit in terms of, we have worked, and even though we're not directly affected, we have worked with our other, the councils both here in Southland and in Otago. We can now demask. Get the signal to demask. The member of the public's gone.
The glasses were steaming up, so I'm very pleased about that.
And she wasn't asked, just to make sure, she wasn't asked to leave.
He didn't recognise anybody, that's why.
She may have rolled her eyes.
Has she been double vexed?
So there is an Otago Southland group of councils that's worked together and engaged in these reforms. We've been part of that. On the basis it's really important that we are seen to be part of the region and part of this Otago Southland collective. And it's very important, is obviously to be seen as part of a bigger group, even though we might have some different roles, might have some different implications, still to be working as a region as to what's best for the region. And so supporting our TA colleagues in that discussion. So us and Otago Regional Council have both been involved, just to make that clear. So we are working with the Mayoral Forum around what is the appropriate outcomes for Southland. And so those conversations with the Mayoral Forum are occurring, and we're part of that Mayoral Forum discussion. Again, noting our role is a little bit different, but we're also looking for the outcomes we're looking for is being aware that standards will need to be raised, and it's important that whatever entity or whatever shape it emerges in, that is reinforced in those changes. So status quo not an option because more investment's needed. The other change to the system is we've now also got a new regulator, Tomato ROI, who provides oversight in that to drinking water space. And we've also got a series of national directions that we have to comply with in terms of the NTS for sure that you're well aware of the impacts on the wastewater and stormwater space. And so, hopefully that answers the questions, Chair.
Thank you.
Another going forward, it's important that Southland and probably Otago Southland do speak with a united voice, whatever that is, and we will support that. Peter, do you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just like to say, a really good question, and I'm just picking up on point C here. How might we see ourselves to work together to achieve a good, suitable income from all of Southland? I think we're in a unique position, like obviously for local councils or local authorities in the province, it's a major decision for them. They're basically talking about the future relevancy of their own entity and what they might look like in the future. So I acknowledge that. So are we in a position to look past Three Waters, whether that will happen or not? We don't know. And see the increasing, all I see is increasing pressures on ratepayers to fund these sorts of projects. So the questions will be around the relevancy of local government and how that will be. So are we going to be best to wait until we're told what to do, or do we start having those discussions in Southland themselves about what the future may look like? So that's my question.
So Chair, can I could maybe assist the conversation. So there's also the future of local government conversations going on. We've recently got an interim report based from the Working Party on that, and so we'll be circulating that shortly. If we haven't circulated, it'll be coming to you shortly. And that sort of is the first part of the. So the Minister set up, Minister Hood has set up a Working Party to look at the future of local government with a reasonably broad brief what it could have looked like. So that first report, and so it's really important that we have a discussion ourselves. We have discussions at council, but also have a collective conversation with other councils on where this thing is getting to. Noting this is an interim report that's come through. So Three Waters is interesting. This future local government is really is a bigger piece, and potentially, and we've also got RMA reforms which are rolling out as well, which also has some. So important that we look at those as a package, and we'll be having discussions on those in the next workshop and next week.
So the pressures still remain and they still build for the ratepayer. But I'm quite heartened to hear that instead of local government and central government forcing those discussions on us, we have them first, and we shape the future of the province.
Chair, noting that the Mayor Reform will have a key role in this as well, and I think one of the things that we talk about collectively as Southland need to have a clear hand on the tiller, if you like, in terms of what is that future looking like.
So there's been an interim report which will be circulated, and that will probably generate some discussion. The final report, I understand, is to come out not long before the local body elections next year. So there'll be an opportunity, probably at the mayoral forum level, but at an individual council level, to do submit further. So I haven't seen the interim report yet, but we'll have that circulated. Lloyd, you also have a question this morning.
Thank you, Chair, and I'll just read it out because I sent it to you on Monday and it was after the papers come through. But Delta COVID-19 puts us into a very different place from last time we had workplace lockdowns and movements around the region. Have we done any planning in regards to having Delta COVID in the workplace or in our workforce and meeting our long-term planned work plans? And I've asked you to comment specifically on ES's plans to have a fully vaccinated workforce, staff wellbeing and community stress levels, seasonal work plans. We need to have staff in the field and on the ground, regional leadership, working with other TAs and meet government timelines, annual plans and regional plan development. There may also be delays in processes out of our control that affect our ability to do our work for some time, and some discussions will have to be made. Are we ready?
So, Chair, we're shaping up this at the moment. Obviously, there's a lot going on, as you talked about, the Delta variants in Auckland and Waikato. And it's clear that we need to be prepared for the next step. We're encouraging staff to get vaccinated at this present time. We will see there's quite a bit of work going on between local government and central government in Wellington with the Tairua and LGNZ and the Department of Internal Affairs working to provide on these matters, such as what might the future look like in terms of mandates and other things. So we'll be guided by them, but we are very conscious of the fact that we need to get ourselves prepared for someone's got a speaker going. We're comfortable. I'm very comfortable. Our staff are prepared at the moment, and we're just looking at what are the implications of when the disease is in Southland, and what impact it might have. So having a fully vaccinated staff and population is going to be key for us. But also then how do we prepare if we've got less staff than we need. We're lucky in terms of we've got a workforce that can operate from home and has done that a couple of times now and done it well. But we also need to be aware that we've got a chunk of our work out in the field, and it's important we get on and keep that going. So can I ask Amy if there's anything else that's useful to add to that conversation?
I would just add that, the health and safety of our staff, the public and the community, remain the highest importance, and all our planning will be taken with that in mind.
Chair, it is a moving piece of work, if you like. This is evolving, and so it's very difficult to predict, but what we can control is how prepared we are to operate in an uncertain world. So we're very focused on that. How do we keep our staff safe as a key part of that, and keep our community and our customers safe?
It's quite clear we've now moved away from an elimination strategy and are following a similar strategy to the Australians, of actually trying to have high vaccination levels. The passport thing is certainly going to come up. People don't vaccinate, you won't be able to travel, you won't be able to go to certain venues, and the sooner we actually probably either do the temperature thing or the saliva test at the airports, there are things that are going to have to happen quite quickly if we're going to contain this, because living with it there's inevitably there's going to be outbreaks. So it's just something we have to be prepared for. It's difficult because you don't know when, but it's just having strategies in place, I think. So that covered all your questions? Right, we'll move to Chairman and Councillors' reports. I haven't got a written one this morning since it's not long since we actually last met. We've been asking for a while and are getting a summary of the Mayoral Forum meetings, which will have circulated. I think it's been long overdue to have a link back to all the councils. So that's now happening. We now have a policy person in place, Shyster Samian or something along those lines. I think she is going to be a very valuable addition and will be very helpful in forward progress with the Mayoral Forum. And we had a meeting yesterday, and she's been around all the other councils and just trying to find what the key issues are, what the focuses are for the regional forums. Do we have a... Yeah.
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, so the Mayoral Forum's got staff, is that correct, or management, or?
Yes, so half a resource, and she.
It's got support.
Are there any, I see a very comprehensive report from Councillor Ludlow, but thank you for that. Do you want to comment on your report?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I might actually. That's a 1 hour webinar. So there's no wasted time in that 1 hour. At the risk of, doing myself out of a role of responsibility, I think probably one of the key takeaways from that work with John was the importance of an independent chair and possibly another independent member on what he prefers us now to call the Risk and Assurance Committee. And the reasons for that are there. Another really key thing for me was that the council he was involved with have committed 2 full-time staff in the risk space within the organisation, and I'm guessing that Hastings is about a similar size, is it?
Quite a bit bigger.
Quite a bit bigger. So that's significant, I think, as far as the work that we've started to do in the risk space. We've taken a step, but there's, as you can see, quite a lot to do, and I would really encourage us to take up the Auditor General's offer of a conversation and some work with him, and if we had the opportunity for the OPEC or full council to hear from John Nichols himself as well in our learning process, I think that would be useful too. So there's a lot there for us to think about, and OPEC might dissect it a bit more at a later date. Thanks.
Thank you, Lyndall. Alan.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So just on the audience on the webinar, territorial authorities and regionals.
Yeah, any chairs of the equivalent of an audit and risk committee were invited and able to. I've got the link if you want to see the link.
You felt he was more targeting the territorials than ourselves?
No, because Hastings is Hastings District, so it's not. So John works with Hastings District Council.
Which is the territorial.
Yeah, but we are audited regardless. So it's about the risk. Some of the specifics around pipes and things were not relevant to us, but the overall risk analysis and policy and procedure relates to everybody.
Lloyd.
A brief report.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I've been sort of zigzagging around the parish a bit in the last month and extending my journeys beyond the Pale up to Canterbury and down the west coast, and sort of having a wee look at some of our issues. So I've seen far fewer of the winter grazing issues around than we have had in the past, so sort of well done everybody involved in that process. And there's widespread planting, so everywhere you go, there's little rabbit-proof and wind-proof planting, so lots of people getting on board with that. I've been keeping an eye on coastal erosion around the Maui, Oropoki, Fortrose, Estuary, Waipapa Point, and there's some fairly rapid erosion there, but it is building up on Arete Beach, so it's sort of a case of give and take. But the main concern would be that anyone who's building anything on sand, at one stage that was a beach, and if it was a beach once, it could very well be a beach again. So, and down the west coast, Bruce Bay, Hokitika, Jackson Bay have all got fairly big coastal erosion issues. Noticed the discoloration down the Waiau and the Rowan yesterday. There's a great plume of discoloured water out to sea that just didn't look quite right, and just wondering whether there's forestry operations in the headwaters there that might have some implications. The wading birds are back, the curlew is back, and they're all expecting good quality mudflats, so well done those birds. So, and the whitebaiters won't have been out because the water's discoloured, which is possibly good for the whitebait because it possibly gives them a chance to push further upriver. Thank you for that.
Now, I noticed the last few days that all the rivers were very discoloured, and I just think the amount of rain we're having, it's like the Waiau hasn't got a lot of farming per se, so the Mararara obviously, which is mainly into forest, would be quite a contributor. I understand before the slate is fresh that the whitebait had been running, and people were reasonably happy, but no, thank you for that. Any further verbal reports this morning? If not, we will move on to item 10, the staff report. Item 1 is the Chief Executive's report. Rob, would you like to speak to your report this morning?
I'll take the report as read, Chair, and just a couple of things on there. Talking about we attended the agricultural agreement signing between the Crown and Ngā Tahu at Bluff last week. Pretty significant milestone for Ngā Tahu. And it means that Ngā Tahu receives an authorisation for 16.6 hectares of space in an agricultural settlement area. It means they can apply for a resource consent in that area. So look, it comes out of the 2004 Maori Commercial Agricultural Settlement Act, and is also part of their treaty claim back in the day. So they're a really important day for iwi and also important for the Crown. And noting our role in this is an administrative role around to provide an authorisation recognising that agreement. It'll be then passed on to Ngā Tahu. So there's a legal process that we've got to administer through this. But very much administered. The other, just lots going on in the national space. As we've talked before, RMA reforms are proceeding. There's now a steering group in place, a local government steering group, that's engaging with MFE on those reforms. And there's a select committee report that's going to be released based on submissions on the first exposure draft that occurred recently. So happy to, and so we're seeking, as I said in the report, seeking an opportunity for a workshop with MFE, but also a joint council workshop on these reforms with, and having MFE to present. So we're working through that at the moment. Really important that the councils collectively engage on this reforms, which is significant. And as we've talked about previously, there is a push towards regionalisation of plans. So a regional spatial plan and a regional natural and built environment plan, and just mechanisms for achieving that regional plan are going to be important and aren't quite clear yet. Those are things we're going to need to form a view on and educate. So happy to take any questions.
Good, Alan.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So just page 60, Rob, on the February 2020 flood damage insurance claim. So are we able to, I understand obviously we've had some money from our insurers on that claim, but are we having an issue now with the final portions of it? And does it, can you comment on the quantum and or whether it's going to affect our accounts to the 30th of June.
Can I ask Paul if he's able to comment on that? We might have to come back to you on that, but.
Yeah, that's something I'll have to come back to you. I'll have to ask Raymond and come back.
My understanding that they've disputed one item and there's still discussions are going on before we can come back to us for that. I've got Lloyd, then Neville.
I've got three things, Mr. Chairman, but just a comment for a start. That workshop with the RMA from MFB, is that going to be open to all councils or just us?
No, that's, sorry, we emphasise that point, it needs to be all councils.
Thank you. That's it. I was hoping you'd say that. Mr. Chairman, on page 58, I think, yeah, 58, just above the science and information operation, Lawa has taken some data, and over the last 10 years there's been very little change in the state of the water. And then there's a comment that we need to have a step change. Should we be taking a positive attitude to the community that over the last 10 years we've had little to no change as being positive, not necessarily an improvement? I would have thought that we should be working with the signs that we've seen over that period of time and saying, well, actually, look, we've done a lot and we've actually halted, if I understand that correctly, that statement. While we can do some more work, that has actually been more positive than negative. Is that correct?
Yeah, I certainly see it as positive and that we've held the line, but actually the challenge is we've got to do much better than that. And so I guess that's, we need to get that message out there. But I'm clear that it's also good to acknowledge the good work underway that's happened. And it's really good that we're not, it's not declining any further. And also this is, now our data is, I guess our science information that's going through the regional forum is more detail. But look, I take your point. It's certainly important that we acknowledge the good work. It's held the line, but actually the challenge now is we've got to improve. We've got to turn this ship around. So let's get that conversation going.
So I think, Mr. Chairman, when we go out to the community soon, that the platform's a little bit different than what it has been in the past. So I think that's a good place to start that conversation from. So thank you for that. The next part is just above the strategic program on page 59. There's a comment there that there's a number of tools being created to assist the forecasting of the Waituna Lagoon. I'm not aware of that, and what are they and what are we doing?
Yeah. Paul, are you able to answer that? Or I know that Chris Jenkins is doing some work on his model. He's got a model that you'll be aware of, which actually could be used to predict what's happening, what's likely to happen. Part of this is around fine-tuning that model. It's a very good model. It's always further work to be done on it, and it's essentially what it's doing, so we can see if it opens at a certain level, are we likely to have it? Is it likely to close or not? Yeah, so that's in essence. And I'm just looking at the back to see if there's anything else to add.
Oh, that's my understanding. If you like an update on Rob's weekly briefing, I can provide you with one.
I wouldn't mind a little bit more, if you would, Mr. Chairman, a little bit more update, because the last modelling I saw pre the last opening was quite different to the actual, what actually happened. The NAWA stuff for weather forecasting was completely wrong, and the level would have been considerably different, the outcome would have been considerably different if it hadn't been opened as per the consent conditions. So I'd like to understand what's actually happening in the background there a little bit more.
So that won't be, the issue won't be about the NEWA forecasting. What Chris is working on is the model, so that there's a capacity to look at what happens if something happens on top of an existing weather event, I understand. So.
And my last comment, Mr. Chairman, is it's good to see in the end of page 66 that the outstanding annual leave has been, looks like it's being addressed, and there's, I think it's coming down to better levels within the organisation. That's my understanding from reading that comment, so thank you for that. It's been a target for us for some time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Right, I've got Neville, David, myself, Lyndall and Alan. Neville.
I'll be very fast. Councillor Baird asked my question for me. So.
David?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just really a clarification, Rob. Just with the settlement with Ngātahu, with the 20% of the marine space, does that go through the same consenting process, or is that given through the Waitangi Tribunal? Is it I'm just, the way it reads here, consent marine farm spaces in Southern region, is that
It gives them the ability to apply for consent in that area. No one else can apply for it in that area. So it's essentially, I describe it, and this might not be accurate, but it's essentially a title for a piece of, for a section of SEGI. And then they've got to apply for, but like a title on land, you've still got to apply for consent. So that's as I describe it.
so they just go, it's got to go through the same process as far as consent process? Thank you for that.
There was some discussion before on the latest LAWA information, and I've talked to Elaine, and hoping we can put in a short workshop so we can all get our heads around the latest details. And I know we sort of concentrate more on the 5-year reports, but we have those 3 categories sort of declining, indeterminate and improving, and it's that quite big area in the middle that is where we probably need to be looking to see what's actually happening. It is frustrating that it is not moving as fast as we'd like, and we're not quite sure how far we are from the next 5-year. I know the scientists like a 10-year view to have any confidence, because of seasonal events from year to year can be distorting, but it'd be good for us to actually see that and just see, are we getting closer to turning the ship around in some of these areas or not? So that is coming up. Then I've got Lyndall, then Alan.
Mr. Chairman, page 58, the equality comments. It's not really a question, it's, I tried the link and it doesn't work. And noting that actually, although their exceedances have been down, we've still got exceedances, so our work there is not done yet. But yeah, I can't get that link to work, so if I can't, maybe somebody else can't either.
Thanks for that. Alan.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So we've been training divers. This is on page 60 again, biosecurity and biodiversity operations. We're training divers to do the work in Fiordland, and we've got this roadblock that says once Auckland drops back to level 2, stage 2 training will start. I guess it's probably your view that it could be some time, maybe never, that Auckland drops to level.
So we've had a bit of a change there, and the permission was granted for those the trainers to come down to Southport, and that's, I think they're on their way now, and they'll have to self-isolate. They go through the process tests before they can come down there, and then the self-isolated in town hour and the tests. And so very much complying with what they need to comply with to make sure they're safe and keeping all of our the divers are training safe. So it's underway. Anything you need to add to that?
Oh, just to say exactly that, we're continuing the program with a very robust health and safety plan over this whole thing, which includes the COVID plan, the training. You know, we acknowledge that it might have taken a very long time for Auckland to get to level 2. So there was a travel exemption granted for the trainers to come down to continue the week, and like I said, these COVID health and safety plans, as well as the other risk assessment health and safety plans around the island to keep everybody safe.
And this is funded through the Jobs for Nature, so it's all funded, and significant amount.
And we can be assured that they will be wearing masks.
Correct.
With the ear in them.
Jeremy.
Chair, just on page 64 in regards to the session we had with the Ministry of Environment and MPI, just on the bullet points that came out of there, and I think the regional councils have the ability to appoint certifiers and auditors in their regions. Are we able to appoint ourselves? Or is that MFE's position, or is that council? I mean, are these? I'm just trying to work out whose bullet points they are, or positions, or?
So Paul, can you add to this conversation, or Wilma, or,
I don't think the details have been clarified as to how the auditors would be appointed. I don't think we've got to that level of clarity yet. So that's something I'll probably, again, could possibly ask the question and come back. But I'm of the view that that's not been clarified yet.
and I think as a general principle, if we're the regulator, then we need to keep some distance between who's certifier and those type of things. Otherwise, we will be seen to be wearing a number of hats and might destroy. So we've got to look at the credibility of the system. So but these are things we've got to fine tune as we go through.
This doesn't alter our position in the policy, the submission that we put to them.
No. No, so we've put a position up. It's still being finalised. There's some thinking going on at these affairs.
Any further questions on Rob's report?
If there's not, I'll move, Mr. Chairman.
Moved by Lloyd, second to that, David. I'll put the motion, all in favour say aye.
Aye.
Right, we'll move to item 2, which is the proposed Environment Southland submissions to the Ministry of the Environment on page 69.
Mr. Masker.
Lucy, do you want to come forward and comment on the report? I've got to use over here.
Thank you, through you, Chair. The paper that's before you is a follow-on from a couple of sessions that we've had regarding a number of submissions to the Ministry for the Environment. 2, we previously discussed the freshwater farm plans and stock exclusion regulations, and also the changes to the intensive winter grazing regulations. So I took additional comments from both Chair and Councillor McCullum on those 2, but this one is to table the draft submission on the proposed changes to natural wetland provisions. So there's quite a lot of detail in there around the staff's detailed thoughts around the specific questions that the Ministry has asked us to answer in regards to this. One thing I just wanted to draw your attention to is this is a technical change. The definition that was inserted to the NPSFM, National Policy Statement for Freshwater Management in 2020, added some complexity, that's fair to say. It inserted the term natural wetland, but pulled through the definition from the RMA for wetland, and then prompted even more complexity by excluding certain elements of wetland. The added struggle that we've had in implementing the changes has been that the NES, the environmental standard that came out at the same time, prohibits natural wetlands being drained for a variety of reasons. So since the package, the Essential Freshwater Package was released, the Ministry's been taking quite a lot of feedback on this particular part of the package. And so what is currently being consulted on is to address some of those points of feedback. So I'm happy to answer any questions or take any councillors' feedback on the actual detailed answers and comments that we've inserted there. Thank you, Chair.
Roy, then Robert, and myself.
Thank you. Can you just clarify for me, the second 2 have been written and submitted, but the wetland is still to be submitted, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
So we do can, because I think your summary up front of clear definition is actually quite important within that. on page 72. I think those 3 or 4 bullet points there would actually help us a lot if they are answered. So we'll look forward to that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Robert?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lucy, I'm just wondering, I'm looking at page 73 and about weeds in wetlands, and wondering if there's a list of plants, or my real question is pasture grass or the pasture grasses considered an exotic plant in the in this wetland frame?
So, through your chair, there isn't an exclusive list of what is considered to be exotic pasture species, which is one of the problems. They've also leaned a little on regional pest management plans, which also have lists of pest species within each region, but it's not neat. And it also, there is a considerable amount of, my lawn, for example, the grass would be considered to be exotic, and it's damped quite a lot, so yeah. So no, that's one of the key problems that they're trying to address with these changes. The added complexity around that is the term around area dominated by more than 50%. So there's also that, that's a challenge as well.
Thank you.
I've got myself, then Peter. We know that the definition for natural wetlands is very unclear. I'm just wondering if we could include in that the use of photographs. Photographs would be a very good method of showing what is. Most of us think we know what they are and what isn't. I think that would be quite useful. I'm getting fielding an odd call at the moment about people wanting to do the right thing, and because of there isn't clarity, that seems to be causing a bit of a roadblock in some areas. So some of our staff are saying, no, that's marvellous what you're doing. The other thing is having the flexibility where you might have, it could have been a pond, for instance, that's actually filled up, and people wanting to actually put in another couple of wetlands further down. And at the moment that appears to be an issue. It's just having a framework for people to do the right thing.
So just on the matter of the artificial wetlands, they exclude, in the NPSFM 2020, they excluded artificial wetlands, but didn't differentiate what that meant. So what's an artificial wetland and what is a natural wetland isn't clearly defined, and that's been one of the implementation issues. In addition to that, they also refer to natural inland wetlands. So there's a number of court cases that are now playing out for what about wetlands that are within the coastal marine area boundary? What are those that are above or below mean water springs? So, yeah, multiple layers of complexity.
And the other question I had was on page 86, and it is to do with subsurface drainage. And after seeing some of the stuff this afternoon, there seems to be some conflicting information about whether we can cultivate over subsurface drainage, and there are mitigations that could actually improve these things. So we can possibly talk about that offline, but it's but in a lot of cases, unless you've got a very heavy rain event, I don't see subsurface drains being a huge contributor in most cases to sediment load. If we could encourage people to put a pipe to the surface that blew things out of the high, then we could actually take quite a bit of, quite simple, not expensive, that there are mitigations that could improve them. Okay, from now I've got Peter, then Robert.
To reply to that, Mr. Chair, I think it's quite an important point that you raised about subsurface drains, and there seems to be documents fighting each other about what is and what isn't.
Yes, I've asked for clarification for your workshop this afternoon, and I'm hoping it's a typo, but it's actually saying in one of those scenarios that no wood grazing over subsurface. That would take out virtually all the land under 10 degrees in Southland, And the follow-on from that would be everybody would have to have a consent, and that's totally contrary to what we've been talking about with MEFE, and that's certainly something we want clarified.
So through you, Chair, the point that you're pointing to there on page 86 is what we submitted for the intensive winter grazing regulation changes in regards to the fact that subsurface drains weren't supposed to be captured as part of the intensive winter grazing regulations package. And so those changes is what they will be addressing, or have indicated they will be addressing as part of the changes to those regulations. And it was that we were consulted upon.
That's encouraging, because that may be a typo for this afternoon, but we can check on that. So I've got Peter, Robert, then Eric, and Lyndall, and Dylan. Peter.
Chairman, look, I just want to draw people's attention towards page 82. And this is stock exclusion. And quote, the focus on fencing up to a certain slope may create a drive towards unintended consequences. In fact, it's a discussion we just had, and that is my concern. So I'd like to think we can develop our thinking around this, because I can see with limited resource we have to put that, or landowners have to put that in the right place for maximum effect. So there's some really good examples of using natural buffers to do the same job instead of invasive fencing to do a similar job. So yeah, just highlighting that point there. So I'm really pleased that's in there, Lucy. Thank you.
Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Lucy, just wondering about two things. One is about some of the definitions that could be wetlands, such as mires, bogs, quagmires, swamps. So is that clearly no? Okay. The second thing is
not anybody who didn't see me shaking my head. No,
right.
not clearly articulated or defined the difference
It
between.
needs to be, I feel, because
There's an element of waiting to see what the court decides on the number of court cases that were already live. So a number of plan appeals were already traversing some of these matters as ours. They span over years, and so some other councils are already struggling with what the definition of wetland was in their own plans. One's going to the High Court, and we're just waiting for a submission on that, a response on that, a decision rather. But there is that element of what is regionally definable versus what needs to be consistently and easily understood at a national level.
the second thing I wondered was you must be factoring in the predictions that some parts of Southland in particular are going to get a lot more rain, and so these are wetlands we're talking about. There's a high chance that they're going to be a bigger factor than they are presently. How would you do that?
So through you, Chair, I think that's a question beyond this paper, but one that we definitely need to be considering. The paper relates to specific questions in regard to how we submit on the changes they're proposing. But in terms of the longer term strategy for wetlands, staff are currently working on that to do a number of things, including what we've done.
Eric.
Yeah, well, I probably partially covered, Lucy, when you mentioned a bit about subsurface drains, but I think we need to be very cautious about that. I'm not actually sure if we have a definition of what a subsurface does. A mould drain, does a tile, does plastic. Actually, I discovered on one of my properties recently, still functioning, a brush drain that went out about the 1930s. And I mean, how do we know where they are? And the other comment I would make is that they're seen as an expensive asset, and most farmers are very cautious that they don't disturb or destroy them in any way, because they're expensive to maintain and expensive to fix. So just, yeah, some comments around the subsurface stuff.
Lyndall?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Relating to the consenting pathways for urban development on page 80. I'm not disagreeing with that at all about no urban development encroaching into wetlands. I think that's the right place to sit. But I'm wondering if you can illuminate me a bit more, Lucy, on the hierarchy issue across those national directions we think we might be able to influence that more so, if at all.
So through you, Chair, this is one of the problems with implementing both the National Policy Statement for Urban Development as well as the NPSFM. And again, in terms of, the same teams weren't working on those two pieces at the Ministry, and so they aren't entirely aligned. But in terms of the guidance that they're attempting to come up with to support the wetlands implementation, they are hoping to make it easier and clearer about which one we need to take account of and how. But it's another part of the puzzle that the consenting teams have to grapple with. So definitely don't have a solution to it, like there isn't magical, they have to give effect to both at the moment, and they aren't entirely compatible. Certainly, but one of the court cases that is currently live is in Auckland because of this. So the wetland definition, natural wetland versus artificial wetland, draining, not draining, and then the need for increasing urban development.
Thanks. Alan and then Lloyd.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. So I'm on page 77, just questioning the definition of quarrying. And is there any uncertainty over what the definition of quarrying is, particularly with regard to gravel extraction that is quite obviously widespread in Southland, and then also have we discussed this with the catchment, what about integrated catchment, about where we extract rock for river work, because obviously quarries are quite integral to what we do in flood protection. But I guess my first question really about quarrying and gravel extraction, is there any ambiguity as to would gravel extraction in the river margin be a problem with the definition?
Okay, so through you, Mr. Chair, I'm going to attempt to answer that question. There was a couple of pieces there with the complexity of the RMA as well as the NPSFMs as well as the NES is kind of mash it up and make it a bit trickier. But yes, gravel extraction and quarries are both defined, and so there is some clarity around those. In terms of did we ask how it would affect our operational teams who do such work, yes, we talked to the integrated catchment team managers and also the catchment, what's Fiona's team now called? Fiona's team as well. So the staff have been asked about for their feedback on all of these comments. The river margin part is where some of these problems with the wetland definitions come in, because obviously wetlands exist in those areas, but they've been excluded under some of the conditions for the NES. So we are attempting to provide them with feedback to how they could simplify it, but also flagging that they need to be more explicit about the boundaries. So it's not a particularly pretty answer, but it's not a particularly pretty thing we're dealing with.
Thank you.
Lloyd.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just started to think about, especially in the wetland page, about unintended consequences. As a comment, you could argue that the airport's a wetland and we mechanically drain it, so I'm not sure how we get on with those sorts of things. But I just wonder whether are we trying to get into two defined, layered definitions of everything around, and it's ended up in the courts and no one can move forward and it's very complex? Or the unintended consequences is that a farm or a property or an activity does water testing and presents to you that the water testing is actually fine, it meets all the standards. How do we deal with that? Because we're going to end up with citizen science as a result of regulation saying that the arguments, whether they're valid or not, may not actually, it's just a minefield for lawyers' payment systems, and we're not actually achieving anything.
Is it to do with wetlands?
Well, I think we're getting to a point where people will react to a direction. If the direction is so complicated and so complex. They will say, well, here's my property, this is the activity that's happening on it, these are the water tests that are coming out of it, this is the result of the activity. How are we going to deal with that? Because that person could say, go and buy the, you can go online now and test for anything basically you can, live in-stream data for major elements. And if that's meeting our targets, how do we actually deal with some of this other stuff as we have a very complex layer through a court system of what is and what isn't, what's in, what's out, where it's positioned, what height, those sorts of things. People will go to the easier option, and that is to do some sort of other regime.
So we're looking to have a correct first, but it's clear we need a definition of wetlands, because one of the challenges is that we're losing wetlands, and we've lost a lot of them, and seem to be a real, that seemed to be a real challenge from a Wellington perspective.
I understand that.
And so if we're going to stop any further loss, then we need some clear definition. Whether the definition is quite right yet is the issue we're dealing with. But I think it's pretty clear we do need, and our regulatory guys need to be clear what is a wetland and what's not. So the issue we've got is this painting the right picture or not? You know, whether what the water quality or what the testing shows is interesting, but actually it's really, are we dealing with a wetland or are we dealing with something else?
I think I'd just add to through you, Chair, that the point to decide what we're going to do about it is the limit setting plan change to come for us. Once the definitions have been clarified and those court decisions have been made higher up, we need to then apply what our rule framework looks like to ensure that we protect our wetlands, however they are defined.
I think, Mr. Chairman, made the issue we've got that's sitting above this is that people have, you call them wetlands or assets on the ground, and we don't recognise them in any way, shape or form. So we actually need to recognise some of these, what we call wetlands or what we understand to be wetlands, as community assets in some way that we want to enhance or multiply or put back to an earlier date. 1996 comes up as a date and time. If we can do that, this thing will actually take off. But at the moment, it's not clear. And people are doing a whole lot of good work, but we're not, as already said earlier on, but we're not getting the accreditation of that work at a local scale.
That may be beyond the scope of this.
I understand that,
this piece of work, but I think generally, I think we've been really clear. We're seeing wetlands as an important part in the future, and so we'll have to think about how do we recognise that in our planning documents. But I absolutely agree. We are pushing for the case for significant wetlands to play a role in stripping out nutrients, but also in actually enhancing biodiversity is a really key part of it. So we can look at the council can look going forward, how does it recognise it? But I don't think we should be expecting too much from Wellington in that space. That's an opportunity for this.
And I guess this issue is about clarifying what is a wetland going forward. As a council, we may well offer some incentives to create wetlands to enhance them, and that's a conversation for another day. Peter?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just want to pick up on it's a really good discussion to have. And just what Rob just said there too, it's going to cross over to biodiversity and even more around climate change, around holding back water and managing water through times of drought or water stress. So it's going to have across the board benefits for the province to promote them in such a way, more than just what we're thinking now is contaminant drops or contaminant catches. So, yeah.
Okay, I'm just looking at the recommendation. Do we need to add any alterations? It's approved the draft. The conversation may well have.
We need to pick up some of the suggestions in one, picking up the discussions in one. Number two is just verification of what's been submitted.
So what needs to be added there? Approve the draft submission document with any alterations,
Incorporating any alterations.
incorporating any alterations.
On the discussions. That mind, I'm happy to move, Mr. Chairman.
Moved by Lloyd, seconded by Alan. Any further discussion? I'll put the recommendation, all in favour will say aye. Aye. Against, no, carried. We'll now move to item 3, which is Southport, New Zealand's annual meeting, page 91.
I move by those recommendations, Chairman.
Thank you, Neville.
I agree for the chairman to have ability to vote and the chairman of Southport.
I'll second
Moved
it.
by Neville, seconded by Lyndall. Any further discussion? If not, I'll put the motion. Everyone will say aye.
Aye.
Against, no, carried.
It would also be helpful to know who's intending to go to Southport. They're already asking for an indication of attendance. So,
I can't remember when it is.
29th.
Yeah, okay.
thank you.
I only go for Chairman Chapter.
It's a little way away, but remember to bring your driver's licence to actually get on to site. We'll move to item 4, which is the councillors' meeting schedule. Are there any alterations, additions, requests for leave?
I actually did add in a number of council workshops which haven't made it to this update yesterday. For later in October and beginning of November. They all went through the diaries yesterday. I will list them in this. I just haven't written them in front of me, so.
There's no additions. Would somebody like to read the recommendation? Moved by Neville, seconded by Bonnie. All in favour will say aye. Aye. Move to item 5, which is the common seal. Reasonably straightforward. Moved by Jeremy, seconded by Bonnie. All in favour will say aye. Aye. Item 11, extraordinary urgent business. I'm not aware of any. So that will conclude the public session of the meeting this morning, and I'll ask Boy to take us offline. Would somebody like to move that we move into public excluded? Moved by Eric, seconded by Lloyd. All in favour will say aye. Can you give us the reasons for moving into
The
public?
reasons you're moving into public excluded are to adopt the committee resolutions from the Strategy and Policy Committee for 22nd of September, the OPAC meeting the 23rd of September, the Regional Services Committee meeting the 23rd of September, and the Chief Executive's Review Subcommittee of the 6th of October. And the grounds are matters are subject to proceedings in the Environment Court to prevent the disclosure or use of official information for improper gain or advantage, to protect the privacy of natural persons, and to allow council to carry on without prejudice negotiations, including commercial and industrial.
Thank you, Jan. Right, the first one is the policy, strategy and policy meetings